Hello!
Hi.
Welcome to everyone's favourite aspect of psychology and sociology and mathematics, which is
Research methods.
we all love research methods almost as much as Sarah loves my Easter eggs, which she is munching through. Right, kicking off with a few types of experiments or types of research methods. Kicking off with a lab experiment. A true experiment has these three key features: an independent variable, or an IV, which is manipulated by the researcher in an attempt to produce a change in a dependent variable, the DV. All other variables which might influence the results, called
Extraneous variables.
are held, or EVs, are held constant or eliminated. Variables that cannot be controlled are called confounding variables, and we'll come on to them a little bit later. Participants are randomly allocated to the experimental conditions or take part in all conditions. These are different types of designs we come on to later. And now it's time for Sarah with strengths and weaknesses.
Strengths of a lab experiment is that all the extraneous variables can be controlled. Therefore, we can infer cause and effect. And another strength is that because you have greater control, it allows the ability to replicate the study, thus ensuring its reliability. Weaknesses are that it's artificial, so the artificial conditions may lead to low ecological validity, and they may not generalize to real-life situations. High risk of demand characteristics, etc., therefore results may lack validity. Results are more likely to be biased by sampling, e.g. people willing to participate in the study, may raise ethical issues of deception, and total control over all variables is not possible.
Lovely. I so like hearing your voice rather than mine for a change. So, the IV, this is a field experiment. The IV is still manipulated, but the study is carried out in the participant's natural environment.
Strengths of the field experiment: being carried out in a natural environment means less artificial and therefore high ecological validity.
Yay!
And they have less bias from sampling and demand characteristics, etc.
Because it's harder to guess the meaning of the study if you're in your own location as opposed to at a lab experiment. So,
And weaknesses: it's more difficult to control all variables, and therefore may not be able to infer cause and effect, and more difficult to replicate, therefore may not be reliable. And you also have ethical problems with privacy and consent.
for example, if you're doing a study on people, how they change, filming them in their own environment in a changing room is probably inflicting problems with privacy. But there we are, a bit creepy, yes. A natural or quasi-experiment is when the IV is changed by natural occurrence. So you do not manipulate the IV, but you still measure the DV.
Strengths of a natural experiment are that you have high ecological validity and very little bias or demand characteristics. Weaknesses, however, it's hard to infer cause and effect due to little control, very difficult to replicate, and you have ethical problems again with privacy and consent.
On to correlations, your fourth and final little research method, sort of, not really. These measure the relationships between two variables. Keyword relationship. If it says relationship in the question, what is it talking about?
Correlation.
Yay, there we go. She's learned something. A correlation can be positive or negative. If when one variable increases, the other increases, then the correlation is positive. If when one variable increases, the other decreases, then the correlation is negative. This is shown on a graph, as on a scatter diagram. Come on to them later. If there is no relationship between the variables, then there is no correlation. The correlation coefficient is a number between -1 and 1 that shows the strength of the relationship between two variables. +1 would be perfect positive correlation, 0 will be no correlation, -1 will be perfect negative correlation. And then the gaps between range from weak and moderate to strong of each correlation, which you should be able to work yourself. And again, a scatter diagram can show this correlation.
Strengths of correlations are that they're ethical as there are no manipulation of variables. For example, it would be unethical to cause stress in an experiment, but you can measure existing stress levels in a correlation. And it can be used to explore relationships such as complex situations and suggest ideas for further research.
Weaknesses now. Nice and bubbly.
Yes.
Go.
Because no IV is being manipulated and extraneous variables not controlled, it's impossible to establish cause and effect using correlational analysis. We cannot say that one causes the other, only that they are linked. Non-linear relationships cannot be measured by a correlation, and we may detect relationships that do not exist but just have occurred due to coincidence.
Right, on to naturalistic observations, which I've been informed before we started this that I'm doing all by myself. Observations involve watching and recording behaviour. Observations may be disclosed when the participants know that they are being observed, or undisclosed when the participants do not know that they are being observed. Naturalistic observation refers to the observation of a behaviour in its natural setting. The researcher makes no attempts to influence the behaviour of those being observed. The aim is, therefore, to study naturally occurring behaviour, and researchers may hide themselves or use video cameras. In observations, data can be sampled by time sampling, where you record what behaviours are occurring at certain time intervals, so what a child is doing every 5 minutes, or event sampling, where you record how many times a certain behaviour or behaviours occur in a set time period. For example, observe a monkey for 30 minutes and count how many times it shows aggression, grooming, behaviour, eats, etc. Strengths of naturalistic observation. Realism. The behaviour is observed in a natural setting with no attempt to change it. Therefore, it's likely that people will behave normally. Low demand characteristics and experimenter effects. When people are unaware that their behaviour will be observed, it is unlikely that it will be influenced by demand characteristics and experimenter effects. New ideas, this is the third point, can provide new ideas for research that can be studied more systematically later. And finally, last strength, testing existing findings. It can be used to discover whether findings of lab experiments are reflected in real life situations. Weaknesses now. Lack of control. The researcher has absolutely no control over the variables, i.e., cause and effect cannot be established. The meanings, observations can describe behaviour, but they are unlikely to tell us why it took place. Observer bias, this is the big one that you should remember. Observers are not passive, they select what they see and tend to see what they expect to see. Observer effects, don't get it mixed up. If people are aware they are being observed, they may wish to be seen in a favourable light and then alter their behaviour, which is never good. And then there's ethical issues, again with the changing room thing. In many cases, these people have no idea that they're being watched, and this means ethics dictates that observations can only be carried out in public places. However, people may still object to being filmed without their knowledge. Which is awful, isn't it, Sarah?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, on to questionnaires, another type of research method. A questionnaire survey involves asking participants questions about, for example, their attitudes, behaviours, or intentions. A use of a questionnaire allows a researcher to gain an information from large numbers of people relatively quickly and efficiently. The aim is to obtain information from a specified population usually by administering a questionnaire to a sample of this population. There are different types of questionnaires and surveys. It can be done by post, telephone, or internet, but there are two main types of questions that you can ask. Closed questions. These are questions where the researcher determines the range of possible answers, so participants are often reply by ticking a box or circling favourable answers. These questions are best used when factual information is required, and they produce quantitative or numerical, easy to analyse data, but they may lack realism due to the forced choices available. And the second type is open-ended questions. These are questions where the researcher does not restrict the range of answers. So, what are your views on the death penalty? Is one example, a bit random. These produce a greater depth of qualitative data, but the data is much more difficult to answer.
Strengths of questionnaires is versatility. Questionnaires can be used in a wide range of situations. Also, the speed. A large amount of data can be collected from a large number of participants quickly compared to interviews. And data from closed questions is easy to analyse and it's easy to compare answers from different groups. And both qualitative and quantitative data can be obtained, so you get a large range of data. And large amounts of data can be gathered relatively cheaply compared to an experiment or an interview. Weaknesses of questionnaires are that some participants may give untruthful answers. There is no guarantee that respondents will answer truthfully. For example, social desirability bias, as participants want their answers to be seen in the best light. And researcher effects. If the researcher administers the questionnaire personally, then participants may be influenced by such things as the researcher's gender, age, or ethnicity. Even unintentional smiles or frowns may have an effect on that, which is kind of weird. And difficulty with controls. It's hard to ensure that the data is collected under controlled conditions, and different participants may interpret the questions differently, so sometimes they mean different things to different people.
Interviews now. You can have a structured interview, which includes questions that are known in advance, and this produces quantitative data. Or you can have an unstructured interview, where little, if anything, is decided in advance, and it's more difficult to analyse, but greater validity. So if you just ask someone a question and they ramble on.
Yes, so strengths of interviews are that it enables the researchers to gain subjective meanings, and it enables complex issues to be explored, and they are flexible, and there is the possibility of uncovering responses unobtainable by other methods. And weaknesses is that it's time consuming compared to questionnaires and requires a considerable amount of training of interviews. And data is difficult to interpret and analyse. And you also have a problem with interviewer effects, whether they're young, old, etc., may affect responses. And also body language may give clues to what responses they want. You also have a problem with social desirability bias and ethical issues of asking personal questions.
The last one now is case studies. A case study is a careful and systematic investigation of a single individual case. A researcher studies a single example either because they are rare or unique in some way, or because they are a typical example of an individual. Case studies can take a long time to conduct, and a variety of data collection methods can be used. Therefore, detailed and in-depth information is obtained. A researcher might use both primary and secondary data in a case study. Primary data are those that are gained directly by the researcher, for example, from like interviews and assessments and observations of the individual or family, or from information gathered from investigating the environment of the individual. And secondary data is those that have already been collected but which are reused by the researcher. Examples of secondary data might include the school and medical records, initial studies of an individual that may have been carried out by other researchers, or something like that. Like Genie in attachment. That's always good. Strengths?
So strengths of a case study is that case studies produce lots of rich and in-depth data, and this in-depth sort of data of understanding is useful for understanding the complexities of individual behaviour, far more so than other methods such as experiments. Also, rare cases offer opportunities to study situations that could not be ethically or practically be artificially contrived, yes. And the realistic content of an individual's life or other unique instances allows the investigation of the complex interaction of many factors.
Yes, so that basically means that it's quite reliable, and you can look into someone's life in detail, which gives you a lot of detail, whatever you're meant to be studying. Weaknesses.
Yes, each case study is unique. Is a unique investigation of a single individual, so the findings can't be generalised to other people, and the evidence obtained from an individual that relates to the past may be very hard to verify. When an investigator studies an individual in depth, they may get to know them well and kind of lose objectivity, so it kind of invalidates their results. And in a case study, variables can't be controlled, so the method cannot be used to investigate causal relationships. The theoretical perspective of the investigator may cause them to interrupt the findings in a biased way.
So that's it for Research Methods Part 1. There are much more, many more research methods, but they are in our other videos / audio podcasts.
Yes.
Thank you very much for listening to Research Methods.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Goodbye.